Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you may be listening to us from on this big, beautiful planet we call Earth. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. And tonight, or today, like I said, wherever you're listening from, we're going to tackle a very important subject, and that is fairness. That's right, fairness. And before we begin, I'd encourage people to come to my website and check out some of the stuff there at michaelcross.net. You can also check out some of the past radio programs that we've done here. And you can do that if you check my website, my YouTube website at Michael Cross. And it's the one that'll mention freedom from conscience in the description. Anyway, I said we were going to deal with fairness. And, fairness has become a big issue in the 2016 elections. I think the person that talks most about fairness, or at least his supporters seem to really emphasize it, is Bernie Sanders. Now, I'm not going to rip on Bernie. I'm not going to really rip on his supporters, because I think that there is actually a certain sense of idealism that people in America and many people around the world, but particularly America, Canada, and so forth, that there's this sense that we want things to be done fairly. We want people to play by the rules, and we sort of expect, maybe owing to those old Horatio Alger stories that you heard about in high school, we sort of expect that if you play by the rules, you put in hard work, that you should succeed. And when we see people not succeed and not given opportunity, that makes us feel bad. And then we feel like maybe it's unfair. And so I'm not going to rip on his supporters, or for Bernie for that matter, because I think it's part of most people's sense of fair play, even if they don't really have empathy for people. We've talked a lot about psychopaths and stuff like this on this show. I think even many psychopaths would say they think things should be done fairly, unless, of course, it involves them. But now, let me explain why I think, though, that this is, dare I say, an unfair way of dealing with politics and measuring fairness. You see, I think ultimately America is based on the idea that everyone should have the opportunity to ascend, and that equality of opportunity does not equate equality of success. Okay? Equality of opportunity does not necessarily mean the results are going to reflect the fairness. And that differs from socialism. That differs from maybe that kind of Scandinavian socialism that looks first at the results, what you see in society, and then you say, this is unfair because there's inequality. Okay? Now, I'd be the first to say that there's no such thing as making sure that everyone's, got an equal chance, okay? If you're born into a rich family in Manhattan, then you're going to have way more opportunities than some poor kid born in an unemployed coal miner's home after Obama shuts down the coal plant that the dad or mom works in West Virginia. Okay? There is way more opportunity for the person who's born into a wealthy background. And there's a variety of reasons we've talked about on this show about that. Not just the financial, but also the connections. There is the aspect of we learn different ways of operating and even thinking depending on our social class. And even when you might, for some reason or another, move from a very low social class to a very high one, like the old Beverly Hillbillies thing, Uncle Jed drills through, accidentally brings up oil on his property when he's shooting at a rabbit or something and becomes rich and moves to Beverly Hills. That does, to a degree, illustrate that you may take the hillbilly out of the hills, but it's still going to be in that person. And that can have an effect on if their children are going to succeed in a system that they're not acculturated to. Now I'm starting to sound like a Bernie Sanders supporter. No, I'm not. Because I think that if we try to enforce equality, if we try to become blind to the fact that some people are born with talents, some people are born with high coordination and they're tall, they're going to be way more likely to succeed at basketball. There's some people that are born strong and kind of husky and sometimes tall, and they may be very good at football. Slender, fast people with coordination might be good at soccer. And that's just the sports. Okay? The thing is that can, to a large degree, be determined by genetics. Now, sure, we think of it, like maybe some sort of children's TV show where the little short guy, who's like 5'3", really practices hard and does everything in his power to be a professional basketball player. And at the end, he scores the winning shot and gets taken by a scout, given a scholarship, and becomes, part of a college basketball team afterwards with a bright future. Now, we all want to believe that's possible, but we also, in the back of our minds, kind of realize that it's not going to happen very often. It's going to be an extreme exception to the rule. Now, you could be short and play basketball. I knew a guy that was in his mid-60s. He used to go out and play basketball with people half his age at his place of employment before they went to work. He was fast. He was good at what he did. But even when he was young, he never would have been able to go out for like basketball and become, a superstar at it. But he could still enjoy it. And so some people are going to have that kind of differences. There's going to be the fact that some people are born better looking. And I don't want to get into this whole, argument over looks and who determines looks, and is it a biological factor that attracts us to people, or is it what society says we should be attracted to? No, I'm not going to really deal with that. You could do a whole show on evolutionary psychology on that one. However, let's just say that I think most people in society could look at a bunch of pictures and they're going to determine, okay, if they're told, find the 5 best looking people, there's going to be a very high chance that they're going to choose the same 5 people. And in our society, attractive people get, there's study after study that's shown, attractive people get pay raises before unattractive people. Taller people, at least with men, taller men get promoted and get pay raises more than shorter men. There's a lot of different factors. Overweight women tend not to get promoted and get pay raises as much as slender women. Now, again, we could say, we need to make a law to change that. How? How do you determine such a thing? How do you enforce it? Oh, yeah, sure, you could create a board of, I think somewhere in California they have something like this in some community. But you would actually have a board that would look over a person's complaint. I didn't get hired because the attractive person got the job. Well, then we get into this very subjective way of looking at how we should run the country. Okay, but ultimately, some people, again, oh my gosh, people in sociology departments around the world are probably thinking, if they're listening to this, going, what's he saying? Every study done on intelligence and genetics shows that there's a correlation. Okay, I've heard some, the vast majority of people that have studied this area would say, well, it's a combination of genetics and environment. And then, of course, you get some extremes that are like, no, it's all genetics. It's, that's just the way it is. You have a seed for a redwood tree and a seed for an oak tree. You plant them both. No matter what you do, you're still going to get an oak tree and you're still going to get a redwood tree. Okay, I understand that. Of course, there's going to have to be some environment, like, of course, if I, do the whole bonsai thing on both trees, I can make them both short, and stunt their growth. And, if you have someone very intelligent being raised in a horrible situation, they're probably not going to succeed as well. However, I could take, no, I don't want to get into I don't want to get into this issue right now. Again, that's a whole nother show. However, look at it. Even though in the Declaration of Independence it says all men are created equal and that they're endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, what it's saying is you're given equality under the law. Okay? And there's a sense that you won't be held back. We don't have a caste system like used to exist, maybe still exists, in India, where you could be born an untouchable and never be able to succeed. And, past injustices when it came to racial stigmas have pretty much been eliminated in the United States. Yeah, there's a lot of racial animosity, but a lot of times that's being driven by some of the people claiming that they're on the side of equality. But the thing is that pretty much we recognize that some people are going to be born with talents and abilities that other people are not going to be born with. Now, that should not prevent them from trying. But then again, how far do we correct the problem in an institutional sort of way? For instance, let's say I have someone who's 15 years old, and he or she really wants to be a doctor. And I have another person who's 15 years old, and he or she also really wants to be a doctor. And let us pretend that they both come from a moderate middle-class background, and one of them has an IQ of about 140. Now, some people are going to say, well, IQs are not totally reliable. You know what? Find something better. It's got very good predictive value, okay? At least when it comes to such things as if I go into a program at a university and I test IQs of graduate students, there's going to be a certain IQ that's just going to be the norm. And it's not going to be average. It's going to be way above average. But let's get back to the original point. We've got this one kid who, both of them want to be doctors, but one of them has a really high IQ, and one of them, let's say, has about 95. That's slightly lower than average. They're both so dedicated. They both even love biology. Okay, they both are really just total biology nerds, and both of them want to be doctors. But now let's pretend that the only, that we live in a society that wants to make sure everyone has such an equal footing that we are then going to take the kid who has the lower IQ and put them into some sort of special program in which we work with them and work with them and work with them so that when they take the medical school exam someday, let's say they're able to get a biology degree, with proper tutoring and assistance in a university, and then they're given all kinds of special programs to help them to pass and get into medical school. Who are you going to really trust to do surgery on you later or to diagnose you? The thing is that there is differences. And if we live in a totally blind, the whole thing with justice, with the scales, I forget which goddess that's supposed to represent. The thing is that we should, in an ideal society, if we truly were laissez-faire and so forth, that we would just say, you know what? We're going to give everyone equal opportunity when it comes, let's say, to public education, make it available. And then later, we'll see how many make it through the system. But we've sort of gotten past that. in American schools, many schools have given up on physical education the way it used to be because some kids are really good and some weren't. So we don't want to make them feel bad, so everyone gets a trophy. Okay? Everyone is told how wonderful they are. Now, I would say that it would be good that if we had this kind of idea of fitness in which, let's say you have a student come in who is overweight, out of shape, and they go from maybe like not even being able to pass to get into a C because they really work hard. That should be rewarded. Okay? That should really be rewarded. Because what's the point of physical education unless you're trying to give someone the tools to live a healthy and happier life? Okay? But instead we get people come along and say, no, this is discriminatory. This stigmatizes someone because of their weight. This isolates them and destroys their self-esteem. Well, what's going to be worse? What if we apply that to smoking? Don't tell that student not to try smoking because you don't want to stigmatize them and give them poor self-esteem. Well, I think a lot of times people that are in these kind of movements that say we should be very, very equal and we should never, ever categorize people. I think ultimately sometimes they can do more damage than they do good. It's to the point that I've read, I'm on some sites that some of my friends I think added me to these things like on Facebook. So they're like these really, really, really feminist sites. And there's a lot of stuff I agree with them on, a lot of stuff. But when I see these things that are saying that, there was one where someone was complaining that they went to their doctor and their doctor suggested they go on a weight loss program. And she was saying how horrible this was, that this doctor was so, 19th century or something like that. No, this doctor, they didn't say whether it was a man or woman, this doctor was concerned with the person's health. Biology doesn't care about social constructs, okay? As Freud said, anatomy is destiny, all right? If your heart is put under strain, if your pancreas is put under strain because of obesity, it's going to cut your lifespan. You're going to die. Are you doing someone a favor by telling them that they should not exercise? Because they should feel good about themselves as they are. You know what? I think they should feel good about themselves because I think they're special. All people are created by God. Okay? And if you don't agree with God, then you got to say all people are the result of thousands of years of evolution, and therefore they should feel special too. Okay? All human beings should feel special, but they should also recognize some things are good for you and some aren't. Okay? Some things are good for you, some aren't. And we shouldn't create these political movements out of things that really should not be politicized. Should we start saying that, this doctor over here is conservative because she believes that people should be more physically fit. This one over here is more sensitive. They believe in telling you what you want to hear. All right? That has no place in medicine whatsoever. Okay? It doesn't even have a place in psychology or psychiatry. I mean, you might feel better if you go to a psychologist who tells you you're just the most wonderful person on earth, even though you may, everyone around you is miserable. Okay? Or would you rather go to a psychologist that says, hey, here's some areas maybe you can make some changes in your life and you'll be happier. Okay? I think a lot of times people just don't, people that are very stubborn, they're starting to find these ways of saying, no, it's someone else's fault. Or if they say something to me, they're the guilty party. No, that's not the case. Okay, so ultimately, we do realize that people are not created equal. Some people have an easier time losing weight. Okay, there's some people, they can eat a pepperoni pizza for breakfast, they can eat it for lunch, they can eat it for dinner, and wash it down with a big fat milkshake. And they're going to be skinny. Okay? and there's other people that can eat a third that much, and they're going to have a little bit of a poking out around the belt. All right? I mean, sure, it's not fair if we're going to say fair, but biology doesn't care about fairness. Biology is biology. You're given what you're given. You're given your genetics, and until we get to such time that we can reprogram your genetics even after you're born, nanotechnology perhaps, that's just going to be the way it is, and you have to live with it. You got to do what you can. Okay? You're born short. Vladimir Putin, he's short. Okay? I think he's like 5'2" or something like that. He could never have been a basketball player or a professional one. Now he's a black belt at judo. So he could be good at judo. I'd expect if there was a fight between Putin in the ring and Obama in the ring, that Putin would have no problem whatsoever being the victor, even though he's like a head shorter. But ultimately you have to compensate. You have to find something else. Like Alfred Adler, the psychologist, psychological pioneer, did say that, you do with what you have, you make it the best you can. You set your life goal accordingly. And our society is totally against that. Our society seems to be veering towards this kind of, it's just not fair. All right? Now, we haven't even touched on economics yet, but it does have a point. And that is this. You're born with different levels of intelligence. You're born with different personality traits. You're born with different aptitudes. Okay? So you can be born like 8 foot tall, but your coordination might be such that you're not going to make it in basketball. Okay? And if you are 8 foot tall and you're slow, you're probably not going to be good at soccer either. And there's other things that will apply to things too. You probably would have a harder time becoming an astronaut if you're 8 feet tall. All right. I mean, the capsules are not built for someone who's 8 feet tall. It's like in Soviet Russia, they used to build tanks around World War II that the only people that could actually serve in a tank would be really short guys around 5 foot tall because they didn't build them big enough. But you see, the thing is, no one said that, well, this is discrimination. You're limiting my ability to be a tank commander. We recognize those kinds of things. And I'm sure if there was a Mars mission, you're going to choose people that are healthy, intelligent, and actually kind of on the short side. Because you'd be in cramped situations and it would last for, it would take almost a year to get to Mars or something like that. So the first people that go to Mars are not going to be big, either shot put, champions or huge basketball player type people. So again, you're going to be limited by certain things. Then we go into psychology. I mean, yeah, if you're born a psychopath, you probably have a pretty good chance in politics nowadays. If you have schizotypal personality disorder, you're probably going to be way better at art. There's all kinds of things that have gotten us where we're at. You could say it's God-given talents to be able to harness and then go from there. I've heard dyslexic people are very good at organizing and really good at creativity. Okay? It's just we all have our things that we have to deal with. So, there is no way you can have equality. You get 100 people, you get 100 100 people with dozens of different variables involved in where they're going to go in life. Okay? It's not some sort of B.F. Skinner, well, if I just train everyone equally, they're all going to make it equally. No. B.F. Skinner, that kind of psychology, that sort of behaviorism, garbage. Okay? It doesn't work. It never has, unless you took 100 people that all had certain traits that were equal, such as intelligence, aptitude, and desire in a certain area. Then you could say that, but not otherwise. And I mean, we recognize that even when, we recognize that if you're a woman and you're married to a man who's sterile but you still want to have kids, you go to a sperm bank. And you don't just say, just give me someone, whoever the last one was that came in, just let me have that one. No, you're going to pick and choose if you live in a country that allows you to do that. All right? So ultimately, we recognize that even in fertility, even in the decision on how, children and stuff like that, there's no such thing as equality. And there wasn't equality when you got married either, because you were looking for people that had certain traits. Okay? If the boss has a daughter who's absolutely stunning, then you better believe the boss is going to be looking for someone who's going to bring something to the table that is going to be pretty demanding. All right, he's going to teach his daughter, okay, here's the kind of guys you date, stuff like that. Call it fair whatsoever or unfair. It's just the way things really are. Now, when we get to economics, there's no fairness in economics. All right? There's people that, if that was the case, you could say that the person who goes in and spends $100 a week on lottery tickets, at some point they should win. And on TV, they do. Okay? On television, it's like, they're down to their last dollar and they buy a lottery ticket, and that's the one that gives them their $15 million payoff. Okay? But TV is fantasy. TV just reinforces our unrealistic expectations of the way life should be. Okay? At least American TV. I mean, I don't know if it's changed or not, but when I was in film literature, they'd show us these French movies, and it was just like, you just knew that it was going to have a sad ending and horrible ending. At least in American movies, they have happy endings. And then, some of these other countries, they're like, you watch the movie, and at the end, you're like, what did I just watch? Okay? But in American movies, it's usually happy ending. The aliens, when the aliens attack America, America beats the aliens. Okay? You don't see the last person being, served up on a dinner table by the cannibalistic aliens from Alpha Centauri or something like that. So the thing is that TV says one thing, our entertainment says one thing, but ultimately reality says something totally different. So that person that spends $100 per week, they may go through their whole life. They've spent enough money that they've invested it. They might have had something nice for their retirement. But instead, they bought lottery tickets every week and never won anything substantial. Okay? Not even close to what they spent. And is that fair? We would say, well, they shouldn't be spending that much money on lottery. But there you're saying, there's a fairness involved. You're saying that, there's a certain element of reality versus fairness. And who are we to say what would be fair anyway? So there's people that go to school. They try their darndest to get a degree. They get a degree. They get a degree in something they really enjoy. They're really good at anthropology. They understand anthropology. They would be fantastic if they were on one of these like history programs or something on TV. But then they wind up working at a steakhouse as a waiter or a waitress. Okay? Because they can't get a job in their field. And it doesn't matter what their potential was. Maybe if they'd have known someone who worked for a network, maybe if they'd have known someone who could have helped them, then yes, they could have succeeded. But it's not like on children's TV where the person who just sings because they love to sing, maybe at a church recital, and then for some reason that day there was a talent agent in the audience who's going, whoa, I've never heard such a beautiful voice. And then they sign them to a Hollywood contract. Okay, to a major record label. That doesn't usually happen. And then if we did talk about fairness, what about the other 20 people that might have been singing in the choir? They didn't get signed up. They could say, that's unfair. We should have a chance at it too. Okay? And in socialism, to a large degree, it would say, yeah, that is unfair. They should all be given a chance to be tested at the talent agency to see if they can succeed. And then we should have a very strong criteria for why they got turned down. Okay, why did those other 19 girls that were in the choir get turned down? What was wrong with their singing abilities? Well, ultimately, if we have a society like that, you're not going to have people, you're not going to have talent agents going out and recruiting. Or it's going to turn into a situation where they're only going to go to people they absolutely know. maybe the daughter of an executive of a movie production agency or something like that. And that's just going to create more of a caste system. It'll actually destroy fairness. And ultimately, when we try to be fair, that's when we become unfair. Because sometimes we take away from the abilities of people, either to succeed or to fail. Sometimes failing is a way of learning how to succeed in the long run. Take a look at what we did with schools. Up until like the 1960s, schools had tracking systems. You had the really good kids in one class, the ones that were kind of like, average, and then you had the lower achievers, and you would teach accordingly. Now, there were problems with that, and I think sometimes maybe they chose people at too young of ages. Okay, 5 years old, it's going to determine your whole life. But at some point, maybe by middle school, maybe tracking would have worked better. Maybe it would have been better so that the smart kid who's trying to learn is not being put down by the students sitting around him. You get that stereotype, maybe from movies of some of the football, kids or something like that, making fun of him because he's talking weird. Okay. But the thing is, a tracking system might work better ultimately. And then get rid of all of the, I got to help this student, all this kid failed. And then the parents come in like, why did my kid fail? How did you fail my kid? Not why did you fail my kid, but, what did you do to fail my kid? So ultimately it comes down to, it's the teacher's fault. The kid failed. And then that means the teacher starts learning that they had better make sure no one fails. So they are going to put a lot more effort into the kids who are at a level where they may fail, and they may start ignoring the average or above average students. Wouldn't it be better if maybe the ones that could fail had a special program where they were encouraged and helped at the levels they need to be, so they weren't left behind and just basically scraping by? And the ones that are, the exceptional, I know it sounds so horrible. People, we've been so programmed to believe that. The exceptional kids are going to be put into a program where they're going to learn more and at a faster pace. And then the average ones still have a chance if they suddenly start blooming later and like, whoa, yeah, I want to do this and this and this, and they test out, and then they can go into the more advanced class. That sounds very elitist. It sounds like a system that in some way is breaking everyone down, but ultimately that's really kind of what we do, at least on a class level. I mean, social class level, if you live in a community of any size, let's say it has 4 or 5 high schools, which high school is going to have all the really superior programs. It's going to be the high school where maybe all the college professors live in the boundaries of that school, and all of the professionals. Usually, it's always the hills is where everyone that's rich lives, up in the hills. And those kids are going to have more opportunity than the kids that are in the school where the average parent is maybe high school level or something. Okay. So, they got high school education, or they have a trade job or something like that. They're not going to have the same opportunities. And so ultimately we do sort of have it based on social class. Just reminded me of something here. And it sounds terrible, but even in our military, which tends to be a great equalizer on social class, I mean, if you're a really, really exceptional student and you're poor, you might, if you want to, remember the thing about doctor, maybe I should throw in maybe the kid that was really, had the high IQ, was poor. You could go into the military. You could apply and go into the Air Force and go into their medical training programs, or other military programs that deal with this sort of thing. And so ultimately, you could think, well, the military can equalize things out because, as long as you're willing to serve your country. And yeah, there's a lot of people that cannot afford college that go into the military. But ultimately, even there, you have a certain level of elitism, maybe. I mean, everyone knows it takes a lot to get into the Air Force. So only your top students are going to be the ones that will be going into the Air Force. From my understanding, at least this is the way it used to be. Coast Guard was something you had to really, you had to be a top student. I don't know if it's still that way. Certain other programs, it just went down, and there was some programs you could just basically just kind of know how to shoot a gun. But even in the military, there is a certain level of what you could call unfairness. Why shouldn't a student who's a good patriotic kid who has maybe an IQ of 90, why shouldn't he be able to apply to the pilots program in the Air Force, to become a pilot? And if he's not really that good, maybe give him a little bit of extra tutoring so he can be. What if he wears glasses? Well, give him some corrective lenses or something like that. I mean, you see what I'm saying? We don't apply these kinds of rules to the military. We don't apply them to our sports. How can we apply them to our economy and start saying that, that we are in some way having to make everything, even to the point of skills, not being something that we should really pay much attention to? That's not a good idea. I mean, and yet I'm seeing these kids that you hear these stories, and I hope they're just these really horrible exceptions that are overblown in their significance. But these kids who they need safe rooms in their universities, or someone draws Trump 2016 on some sidewalk, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know how I could deal with life now." And they like want counseling or something, or search down the horrible villain that did this. Well, what happens when these guys start graduating and going into the real world? Okay? Where they've been told everything should be fair. And by golly, they voted for Bernie so they could have everything fair. Let's just imagine Bernie gets elected president. Do you really think he could change that much in this respect? I don't think so. But let's say Bernie's the president, and they're all like, "Yay, I've got my degree in sociology," or something. And they go in and they see a job with a major corporation, and they apply. And they get the, thanks for applying, but no thanks. And then they just keep applying and applying and applying. And they don't get anything. Well, now they're going to be very upset. They're going to be like, "I've got all this student debt. I got this college degree. This is not fair." Well, how do you alleviate that? Do you pay off their student debt? What about the kid that, you got some strange situations out there. You read these stories about some girl who wants to, work her way through law school. So she, becomes a stripper on the weekends or something like that. Now, I'm not saying that's a good choice. But let's say she did that and she was able to pay for her college education. Should she then support the idea that someone who they just partied on weekends and just took out student loans and took their laundry home for their mom to do on weekends and things like that? Is that a situation which those kids should get their college education reimbursed? Let's just cancel their loan. And then what about the kids that did go into the military so that they could get a college degree, and maybe in the process they got deployed and they maybe lost their foot, got shot off. Okay, but they still got their college degree. They still, out there in the workforce. Should they feel good about the idea that these other people are getting their debts canceled? I think ultimately, even though part of me says it would be so nice if we could just have college that would be, free for people. When I was in high school, I scored always in the top 99 whatever percentile in all tests that were done in science, in all the sciences. And yet I knew that there was no way I could go into medical school. There was no way. My dad was a World War II vet, and he basically said he'd break my leg if I ever tried to sign up for the military. And B, it was just too expensive. My family was working class. They could not have afforded it. So I had to choose something else. I think I could have made a really good doctor overall, but I'll tell you, it would have been nice if we'd base it on a meritocracy where students that score certain levels, could go. But then that means we have to set up a system similar to some countries that do have free education, but that you have to be like part of the top 10 or 15% of students to get that free education. The people that are saying, oh yeah, we should have something like they do in blah, blah, blah country, they don't realize that country does not give away something for absolutely free. Okay? That country gives away a free education if you qualify for it. So, if you just mess around and get lousy grades, or you just can't get the grades, you're not going to get into the program you want. So therefore, we could set that up, but then there's going to be people in the United States that are going to say, this is not fair. This is not fair. You cannot say that I cannot go to university, or my kids can't go to university because they happen to score lower. You know what? My kids come from a disadvantaged background. My husband left me and we've just been barely making ends meet. And there's probably some validity to that. It is difficult if you come from a background that is in some way, going to be not the most ideal. I was trying to find a politically correct way of saying that. But you know what I mean, right? You know what I mean. There's always going to be something. And so then you have to just say, okay, everyone gets a free education. Fine. Let everyone have a free education. Maybe there'd be some way we can figure a way of paying for it. Maybe, maybe we find some oil in the Arctic and can devote all the profits, set up a state oil company and then have all the profits go into paying for the college education. But you know what you're going to have then? You're going to have your waiter at, whatever restaurant you go to. He or she is going to have, waitress, I should say, or is there a politically incorrect way of saying waiter and waitress now? That they're going to have a situation in which they're going to have the master's degree in theoretical physics. And everyone's going to have these really great degrees, but they're going to be working dirt jobs. Okay? Is that what we really want? Because then it just turns into, okay, well, if we really want to get the very best of the best, then we're going to have to make sure that only someone with a PhD will be considered for this particular job. Remember, in the 1970s, having a high school degree could get you in the door for most jobs. Then as everyone started saying their kids, keeping their kids in high school, and, because the economy was good, then it turned into, okay, well, it's good to have a little bit of college. Then it turned into, oh, you have to have a college degree. Then it turns into, oh, you have to have some postgraduate degree. Then it turned into, well, you got to have a master's degree. Then it starts turning into, you have to have a PhD. Okay? And the society you're asking for, if everyone gets to go to college, is going to be one in which you're going to have a lot of people who are going to be dissatisfied with life because they're going to have really good degrees, but they're going to be delivering pizza for the rest of their life. Okay? Now, you could argue it would be nice to have a society where people have more education. But ultimately, then you're going to be in a situation where people will probably feel like they've been cheated. How is it that I have a degree in theoretical physics and the guy my best friend, roommate, he graduated with theoretical physics and he's working at a lab and I'm not? Well, it's because there's only a certain, number of people that can go into theoretical physics. Okay? Not everyone that has the degree can go into it. So ultimately it will be, again, unfair. And then if we look at, we hear a lot of, here's one that's going to be, here's one that's going to be sort of the opposite of intuition. And that is the whole thing with trade policies I've been hearing. Now, in fairness to the Bernie people, they usually side, I would say, I find a lot of agreement with them on this one. I was going to say they side on the right side. But the thing is, they'll look at these big trade agreements that are often written almost primarily or with the help of large corporations that will benefit from such trade agreements. Don't expect that if you have a local kebab stand or hardware store or a beauty salon that you're going to benefit at all from these kind of big trade bills that are being discussed right now. But, it's kind of interesting. It's interesting that when it comes to a free education, oh my gosh, I'm going to sound like Bernie or his supporters. When it comes to, issues like, having more access to education and maybe better health care provided for people, we hear fairness usually coming from that quarter, the people that would benefit from it. But then when we have these big trade things, then we start hearing things about free trade. Oh, it's free and fair trade. And that's coming from the corporate class. Now, are these guys supporting fairness? Well, for themselves, I guess. Because these guys, as part of the corporate class, they will scream about, let's make it so wonderful and an open playing field worldwide. And they know very well that they've got the resources and the infrastructure and everything that they will dominate in other countries. And they'll make alliances with other corporations, and it'll just build up the oligarchy that we have in the United States. We really, if you're going to talk about free trade and capitalism and stuff, capitalism doesn't necessarily mean free trade. I mean, free enterprise. Capitalism usually means that it's a private economy and it's based on the economics of the market. But what happens when the market is more oligarchical? We have 6 corporations. Look it up. There's a documentary done back, I think, around 2004 or something, but it still applies, and it's actually gotten worse in regards to media. Look up the Merchants of Cool. If you just Google that in, Merchants of Cool, PBS. And what you will find there is that there's one page called Media Giants. I think that's the name of it. If you Google Media Giants, PBS, and Frontline to be specific, and Merchants of Cool, you'll take you there. 6 corporations dominate the most of what you read, most of what you watch. Okay, and it goes beyond that even. I mean, if you start looking at the tentacles, they're out there all over the place, and especially when it comes to publishing. But the thing is, we have an oligarchy. We have a situation where you think you got a lot of choices, but you've got a very small number of choice providers. And that's not just true for the media. It's true for a lot of other areas, and it's kind of getting worse. I mean, a lot of the stuff you hear about with coal plants being shut down. And my gosh, the plants that produce energy from coal in the United States. During the 70s, after Nixon did the whole thing with the EPA, developing the EPA. Yeah, that's right. If you look back, the president that did the great leap forward when it comes to environmentalism was Richard Nixon. Doesn't get much credit for that, though. But ultimately, they really modernized and were able to get rid of a lot of the pollution that was coming out of all factory systems, including coal plants. But what's happening now? You're seeing more of these being closed down. The government goes after them and, they're closed down. And the thing is, it does not decrease the demand for energy. It's not like the people that were getting electricity from these plants are suddenly like, oh, now we've got solar panels and windmills. Now we don't need it. No, they're having to get it from someone else. And we're seeing a reduction in the size of the providers. Less and less providers. But yet we still have the energy production. So we are developing more and more and more of an oligarchical system. I mean, Jimmy Carter just a while back said America was an oligarchy. It's not really a democracy. And I agree with him. You can sit back and say, Jimmy Carter, but think about it. He's right there. And the thing is that we have to look at is that that's not really fair. And that's going to eventually lead to where, I look at the media and I have a fear for what's going to happen ultimately when it comes to internet freedom. When the big players in media and cable and stuff, when they're able to say, let's kind of write the rules here. And the local congressman's like, okay, sir. Sure, whatever you say. And if you don't believe that's the way they operate, write to your local congressman, ask him or her, have they read these trade bills? TPP and TPI, TTP, TTIP. Yeah. Have they read them? Because from my understanding, most of them have not even read these bills. And yet these are going to become law? You think it's going to help the little guy? Yeah, so there I'll say, they're saying, yeah, this is great for freedom and fairness and all this kind of stuff. And in reality, it's not going to help you out at all. All right? So our society has a lot of inequality and fairness. Now you could say, well, these companies have built themselves up because they provided services people wanted. And they did so in such a way that they got money and they used that money to invest. They bought other companies, they grew, and now they can provide you with all those wonderful like reality shows on TV. All right? But, notice I'm a little sarcastic there. But at some point, you're going to, when you get government that comes in and will say, and this has been a reality for years, okay? This is not something new. You own that hypothetical kebab stand or hardware store or beauty salon, and you call your local congressman or congresswoman and say, you know what, I own Ann's nails and hair, whatever. And I'd like to have a meeting with you. Or you own, any number, Fred's Hardware, whatever, those kinds of things. And you call your congressman or senator, they won't have time for you. Unless you're related to them. They won't have time for you. But if you come from one of these big corporations, if you're a lobbyist for one of these big corporations, oh, they'll make time for you, believe me. Okay, especially these defense contractors and some of those, they'll make time for you. And that's just the way it is. And as these corporations, as we have more choices but less choice providers, that means they're going to have more and more power. They're going to have a better ability to start changing the way the economy is set up. And that means you're going to get something that's going to look like a regulatory system. It might even be called socialism in the future. But it's not going to have the human elements that you think, those nice fuzzy elements when you go to a Bernie rally and people talk about we need this and this and this for the people. It's not going to have those elements. All it is going to be regulations. And those regulations are going to be there to benefit those large corporations, those oligopolies. They're going to make sure that they tax in such a way that small providers, small companies are not going to be able to compete. That they're going to have to, it's going to become, small businesses won't even be able to play the game. And then those people won't have jobs in small businesses, which means now they're out there in the labor force looking for work. But they're not able to give work, which ultimately means you're going to have an economy that's going to be spiraling down. Now, the sad part is usually there's a way that gets corrected. But the way it gets corrected in the past is that a society collapses. And then when it collapses, it's either replaced by another society, or you have a situation in which there's a rebuilding of that society. And then that allows new players to come in. But instead, if you just keep it, getting bigger, and I almost use the word fatter, and then, you're going to get people say, you're triggering me, something like that. But yeah, someone just laying there on a couch, eating and eating and eating and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But they're eating all the stuff up. And there's going to be less available for people to advance in our society. But it'll be regulated. It'll be fair. Everyone will be fairly regulated, but it won't apply to the big oligopolical corporations. And that's what people have got to keep in mind. That sometimes the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Okay? Most people don't do evil just because they want to. Most people don't do things that hurt people because they want it to hurt people. Most people don't create misery just for the sake of creating misery. There's not that many sadists in our population. There really isn't. But often what happens is trying to make things better will ultimately make them worse. And so we need to look at it that way. Now, does that mean that we're always going to be faced with poverty, inequality, people not being able to achieve the things they dream of and stuff? Yeah, it will. You'll always have that. Even if we do get to some sort of utopian techno society where everyone gets, something like Capital City in the Hunger Games. But you notice, Capital City in the Hunger Games still relied on all the districts to provide them with what they needed. And that's what you're always going to have. And that's sad, but it's just the way things are. And we need ultimately just to think, do we really want power concentrated in such a way that we do create a monster that we don't know how to deal with in the future? That only benefits a tiny, less than 1% of 1%. 1 in 1,000 people will be living in Capital City. You're not going to be there. You're going to be in districts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, or whatever. Okay? So ultimately, think about those things when you hear people talk about fairness, and when you hear people talk about, we've got to equalize everything. We got to not, have suffering in our society. Think about what ultimately is going to be the cost to get there, and then it's not going to get there when you do try to get there. Anyway, that's all for tonight's show, and I invite you to come back next week for another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions.
You are listening to UCY.TV. Why don't you stick around?